What special significance does the passion flower have?
Spanish friars of the 16th century first gave the name to this flower. They saw in the form of the passion flower, passiflora, a representation of the Passion of Christ. The flowers have 5 petals and 5 sepals, which was thought to symbolize the 10 faithful apostles present at the crucifixion. The corona of 5 filaments was believed to resemble Christ's crown of thorns. The 5 stamens represented the 5 wounds in Christ's body, and the 3 stigmas stood for the nails driven into his hands and feet. Most species of passion flower are native to the tropical areas of the Western Hemisphere.
When was the first zoo in the United States established?
The Philadelphia Zoological Garden, chartered in 1859, was the first zoo in the United States. The zoo was delayed by the Civil War, financial difficulties, and restrictions on transporting wild animals. It opened in 1874 on 33 acres, 13 hectares, and 282 animals were exhibited.
How does a meteorite differ from a meteoroid?
A meteorite is a natural object of extraterrestrial origin that survives passage through Earth's atmosphere and hits Earth's surface. A meteorite is often confused with a meteoroid or a meteor. A meteoroid is a small object in outer space, generally less than 30 feet, 10 meters, in diameter. A meteor, sometimes called a shooting star, is the flash of light seen when an object passes through Earth's atmosphere and burns as a result of heating caused by friction. A meteoroid becomes a meteor when it enters Earth's atmosphere. If any portion of a meteoroid lands on Earth, it is a meteorite. There are 3 kinds of meteorites. Irons contain 85% to 95% iron, the rest of their mass is mostly nickel. Stony irons are relatively rare meteorites composed of about 50% iron and 50% silicates.
Are freckles dangerous?
Freckles, those tan or brown spots on the skin, are small areas of increased skin pigment or melanin. There is a genetic tendency to develop freckles, and parents with freckles often pass this trait down to their children. Freckles usually occur on the face, arms, and other parts of the body that are exposed to the sun. Freckles themselves pose no health risks, but individuals who freckle easily are at an increased risk for skin cancer.
What is the difference between spelunking and speleology?
Spelunking, or sport caving, is exploring caves as a hobby or for recreation. Speleology is the scientific study of caves and related phenomena.
Who was the first person to break the sound barrier?
On October 14, 1947, Charles E. Chuck Yeager, 1923, was the first pilot to break the sound barrier. He flew a Bell X-1, attaining a speed of 750 miles, 1,207 kilometers per hour. Mach 1.06, and an altitude of 70,140 feet, 21,379 meters, over the town of Victorville, California. The first woman to break the sound barrier was Jacqueline Cochran. C. 1906 to 1980. On May 18, 1953, she flew a North American F-86 Sabre over Edwards Air Force Base in California. Attaining the speed of 760 miles, 1,223 kilometers per hour.
What members of Nadaria are economically important?
Reef-building corals are among the most important members of Nadaria. Coral reefs are among the most productive of all ecosystems. They are large formations of calcium carbonate. Limestone, in tropical seas laid down by living organisms over thousands of years. Fishes and other animals associated with reefs provide an important source of food for humans. And reefs serve as tourist attractions. Many terrestrial organisms also benefit from coral reefs, which form and maintain the foundation of thousands of islands. By providing a barrier against waves, reefs also protect shorelines against storms and erosion.
Why was 1816 known as the year without a summer?
The eruption of Mount Tambora, a volcano in Indonesia. In 1815 threw billions of cubic yards of dust over 15 miles, 24 kilometers, into the atmosphere. Because the dust penetrated the stratosphere, wind currents spread it throughout the world. As a consequence of this volcanic activity, in 1816 normal weather patterns were greatly altered. Some parts of Europe and the British Isles experienced average temperatures 2.9 to 5.8 degrees Fahrenheit. 1.6 to 3.2 degrees Celsius, below normal. In New England heavy snow fell between June 6 and June 11 and frost occurred in every month of 1816. Crop failures occurred in Western Europe and Canada as well as in New England. By 1817 the excess dust had settled and the climate returned to more normal conditions.
Can animals regenerate parts of their bodies?
Regeneration does occur in some animals, however. It progressively declines the more complex the animal species becomes. Among primitive invertebrates, lacking a backbone, regeneration frequently occurs. For example, a planarium, flatworm, can split symmetrically, each part becoming a clone of the other. In higher invertebrates, regeneration occurs in echinoderms, such as starfish, and arthropods, such as insects and crustaceans. Regeneration of appendages, limbs, wings, and antennae, occurs in insects, such as cockroaches, fruit flies, and locusts, and in crustaceans, such as lobsters, crabs, and crayfish. For example, regeneration of the crayfish's missing claw occurs at its next molt. Shedding of its hard cuticle exterior shell/skin for the growing and the subsequent hardening of a new cuticle exterior. However, sometimes the regenerated claw does not achieve the same size of the missing claw. But after every molt, occurring 2 to 3 times a year, it grows and will eventually become nearly as large as the original claw. On a very limited basis, some amphibians and reptiles can replace a lost leg or tail.
How many quills does a porcupine have?
For its defensive weapon, the average North American porcupine has about 30,000 quills or specialized hairs. Comparable in hardness and flexibility to slivers of celluloid and so sharply pointed that they can penetrate any hide. The quills that do the most damage are the short ones that stud the porcupine's muscular tail. With a few lashes, the porcupine can send a rain of quills that have tiny scale-like barbs into the skin of its adversary. The quills work their way inward because of their barbs and the involuntary muscular action of the victim. Sometimes the quills can work themselves out, but other times the quills pierce vital organs, and the victim dies. Slow-footed and stocky, porcupines spend much of their time in the trees, using their formidable incisors to strip off bark and foliage for their food, and supplement their diets with fruits and grasses. Porcupines have a ravenous appetite for salt, as herbivores. Plant-eating animals, their diets have insufficient salt. So natural salt licks, animal bones left by carnivores, meat-eating animals. Yellow pond lilies, and other items having a high salt content, including paints, plywood adhesives, and human clothing that bears traces of sweat, have a strong appeal to porcupines.
Who was the first person to map the Gulf Stream?
In his travels to and from France as a diplomat, Benjamin Franklin, 1706 to 1790, noticed a difference in speed in the two directions of travel between France and America. He was the first to study ships' reports seriously to determine the cause of the speed variation. As a result, he found that there was a current of warm water coming from the Gulf. of Mexico that crossed the North Atlantic Ocean in the direction of Europe. In 1770, Franklin mapped it. Franklin thought the current started in the Gulf of Mexico. However, the Gulf Stream actually originates in the western Caribbean Sea and moves through the Gulf of Mexico, the Straits of Florida, then north along the east coast of the United States to Cape Hatteras in North Carolina, where it becomes northeast. The Gulf Stream eventually breaks up near Newfoundland, Canada, to form smaller currents or eddies. Some of these eddies blow toward the British Isles and Norway, causing the climate of these regions to be milder than other areas of northwestern Europe.
What is a Uniform Resource Locator, or URL?
A Uniform Resource Locator, URL, can be thought of as the address for a given computer on the Internet. A URL consists of two parts: 1, the protocol identifier, and 2, the resource name. The protocol identifier indicates which protocol to use, e.g., HTTP for Hypertext Transfer Protocol or FTP for File Transfer Protocol. Most browsers default to HTTP as the protocol identifier, so it is not necessary to include that part of the URL when entering an Internet address in the browser's toolbar. The resource identifier specifies the IP, Internet Protocol, address or domain name where the web page is located. An IP address is a string of numbers separated by periods. More familiar and easier to remember than the IP address is a domain name. Domain names are composed of a name with a top-level domain, TLD, suffix. The IP address and domain name both point to the same place, typing 192.0.32.10 in the address bar of a web browser will bring up the same page as entering the more user-friendly example.com.
Are any devices being developed to replace silicon chips?
When transistors were introduced in 1948, they demanded less power than fragile high-temperature vacuum tubes. They allowed electronic equipment to become smaller, faster, and more dependable, and they generated less heat. These developments made computers much more economical and accessible. They also made portable radios practical. However, the smaller components were harder to wire together, and hand wiring was both expensive and error-prone. In the early 1960s, circuits on silicon chips allowed manufacturers to build increased power, speed, and memory storage into smaller packages, which required less electricity to operate and generated even less heat. While through most of the 1970s manufacturers could count on doubling the components on a chip every year, without increasing the size of the chip, the size limitations of silicon chips are becoming more restrictive. Though components continue to grow smaller, the same rate of shrinking cannot be maintained. Researchers are investigating different materials to use in making circuit chips. Gallium arsenide is harder to handle in manufacturing, but it has the potential for greatly increased switching speed. Organic polymers are potentially cheaper to manufacture and could be used for liquid crystal and other flat-screen displays, which need to have their electronic circuits spread over a wide area. Unfortunately, organic polymers do not allow electricity to pass through as well as the silicons do. Several researchers are working on hybrid chips, which could combine the benefits of organic polymers with those of silicon. Researchers are also in the initial stages of developing integrated optical chips, which would use light rather than electric current. Optical chips would generate little or no heat, would allow faster switching, and would be immune to electrical noise.
How long was the Mir space station in space?
The first component, a 20.4-ton core module of the Mir space station, was launched in February 1986. The core module served as the living and working quarters, including the communications and command center of the space station. 5 more modules were launched and attached to ports on the core module over the next 10 years. Mir had self-contained oxygen, power, and water generation capabilities, allowing cosmonauts and astronauts to spend extended periods of time in space. Scientific investigations aboard Mir included space technology experiments, life science and biological research, astrophysics, and material processing tests. Much of the life science and biological research focused on the effects of microgravity on humans and flora and fauna. Since some of the astronauts spent many months at a time in Mir, it was possible to study the physiological differences in long and short duration missions. Space technology studies investigated various materials for space use, and the effects of the low Earth orbit environment on various materials. The Mir space station was deorbited on March 23, 2001, after more than 86,000 orbits around Earth. The space station broke into several large pieces and thousands of smaller ones over the Pacific Ocean. There were no injuries.
What is the status of the African elephant?
From 1979 to 1989, Africa lost half of its elephants from poaching and illegal ivory trade, with the population decreasing from an estimated 1.3 million to 600,000. This led to the transfer of the African elephant from threatened to endangered status in October 1989 by the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species, CITES. An ivory ban took effect on January 18, 1990. Botswana, Namibia, and Zimbabwe have agreed to restrict the sale of ivory to a single, government-controlled center in each country. All countries have further pledged to allow independent monitoring of the sale, packing, and shipping processes to ensure compliance with all conditions.
What is a tiger's eye?
Tiger's eye is a semi-precious quartz gem that has a vertical luminescent band like that of a cat's eye. To achieve the effect of a cat's eye, veins of parallel blue asbestos fibers are first altered to iron oxides and then replaced by silica. The gem has a rich yellow to yellow-brown or brown color.
What are the diameter and circumference of the Moon?
The Moon's diameter is 2,159 miles, 3,475 kilometers. And its circumference is 6,790 miles, 10,864 kilometers. The Moon is 27% the size of Earth.
What are some general effects of aging on the human body?
The aging process affects every organ system. Some changes begin as early as ages 30 to 40. The aging process becomes more rapid between ages 55 and 60.
What is diatomite?
Diatomite, also called diatomaceous earth, is a white or cream-colored, friable, porous rock composed of the fossil remains of diatoms, small water plants with silica cell walls. These fossils build up on the ocean bottoms to form diatomite. And in some places these areas have become dry land or diatomaceous earth. Chemically inert and having a rough texture and other unusual physical properties. It is suitable for many scientific and industrial purposes, including use as a filtering agent, building material, heat, cold, and sound insulator, catalyst carrier, filler absorbent, abrasive, and ingredient in pharmaceutical preparations. Dynamite is made from it by soaking it in the liquid explosive nitroglycerin.
What is meant by Mendelian inheritance?
Mendelian inheritance refers to genetic traits carried through heredity. The process was studied and described by Austrian monk Gregor Mendel. Mendel was the first to deduce correctly the basic principles of heredity. Mendelian traits are also called single gene or monogenic traits, because they are controlled by the action of a single gene or gene pair. More than 4,300 human disorders are known or suspected to be inherited as Mendelian traits, encompassing autosomal dominant, E, G, neurofibromatosis, autosomal recessive, e.g. cystic fibrosis, and sex-linked dominant and recessive conditions, e.g. color blindness and hemophilia. Overall, incidence of Mendelian disorders in the human population is about 1%. Many non-anomalous characteristics that make up human variation are also inherited in Mendelian fashion.
Is there a formula for computing the wind chill?
Here is how you calculate the new wind chill index. TWC 535.7410.6215 T, 35.75, V 0.16, 10.4275 T, V 0.16, TWC is the wind chill in degrees F. V is the wind speed in miles per hour, and T is the temperature in degrees F.
What are the causes of epilepsy?
Epilepsy is a brain disorder in which clusters of neurons in the brain sometimes signal abnormally. Epilepsy may develop because of an abnormality in brain wiring, an imbalance of neurotransmitters, or some combination of these factors. During an epileptic seizure, neurons may fire as many as 500 times a second, much faster than the normal rate of about 80 times a second. When the normal pattern of neuronal activity becomes disturbed, strange sensations, emotions and behavior, convulsions, muscle spasms, and loss of consciousness may be experienced.
Which conifers in North America lose their leaves in winter?
Don redwood trees, metasequoia, are deciduous. Their leaves are bright green in summer and turn coppery red in the fall before they drop. Previously known only as a fossil, the tree was found in China in 1941 and has been growing in the United States since the 1940s. The U.S. Department of Agriculture distributed seeds to experimental growers in the United States, and the Don redwood tree now grows all over the country. The only native conifers that shed all of their leaves in the fall are the bald cypress, Taxidium distichum, and the larch, Larix larsina.
What period of time has come to be known as the Golden Age of microbiology?
The era known as the Golden Age of microbiology began in 1857, with the work of Louis Pasteur and Robert Koch, and lasted about 60 years. During this period of time, there were many important scientific discoveries. Joseph Lister's, 1827 to 1912, practice of treating surgical wounds with a phenol solution led to the advent of aseptic surgery. The advancements Paul Ehrlich, 1854 to 1915, made to the theory of immunity, synthesized the magic bullet, an arsenic compound that proved effective in treating syphilis in humans. In 1884, Elie Mechnikov, 1845 to 1916, an associate of Pasteur, published a report on phagocytosis. The report explained the defensive process in which the body's white blood cells engulf and destroy microorganisms. In 1897, Masaki Ogata reported that rat fleas transmitted bubonic plague, ending the centuries-old mystery of how plague was transmitted. The following year, Kiyoshi Shiga, 1871 to 1957, isolated the bacterium responsible for bacterial dysentery. This organism was eventually named Shigella dysenteriae. During the golden age of microbiology, researchers identified the specific microorganism responsible for numerous infectious diseases. The following chart identifies many of these diseases, their infectious agent, who discovered them, and the year they were discovered.
How do chlorofluorocarbons affect Earth's ozone layer?
Chlorofluorocarbons, CFCs, are hydrocarbons, such as freon, in which part or all of the hydrogen atoms have been replaced by fluorine atoms. These can be liquids or gases, are non-flammable and heat-stable, and are used as refrigerants, aerosol propellants, and solvents. When released into the air, they slowly rise into Earth's upper atmosphere, where they are broken apart by ultraviolet rays from the sun. Some of the resultant molecular fragments react with the ozone in the atmosphere, reducing the amount of ozone. The CFC molecules' chlorine atoms act as catalysts in a complex set of reactions that convert 2 molecules of ozone into 3 molecules of ordinary oxygen. This is depleting the beneficial ozone layer faster than it can be recharged by natural processes. The resultant hole lets through more ultraviolet light to Earth's surface and creates health problems for humans, such as cataracts and skin cancer, and disturbs delicate ecosystems, for example, making plants produce fewer seeds. In 1978, the U.S. government banned the use of fluorocarbon aerosols, and currently aerosol propellants have been changed from fluorocarbons to hydrocarbons, such as butane.
How fast is DNA copied?
In prokaryotes, about 1,000 nucleotides can be copied per second. So all of the 4.7 megabytes of Escherichia coli can be copied in about 40 minutes. Since the eukaryotic genome is immense compared to the prokaryotic genome, one might think that the eukaryotic DNA replication would take a very long time. However, actual measurements show that the chromosomes in eukaryotes have multiple replication sites per chromosome. Eukaryotic cells can replicate about 500 to 5,000 bases per minute. The actual time to copy the entire genome would depend on the size of their genome.
Who started Earth Day?
The first Earth Day, April 22, 1970, was coordinated by Dennis Hayes. 1944, at the request of Gaylord Nelson, 1916 to 2005, U.S. Senator from Wisconsin. Nelson is sometimes called the father of Earth Day. His main objective was to organize a nationwide public demonstration so large it would get the attention of politicians and force the environmental issue into the political dialogue of the nation. Important official actions that began soon after the celebration of the first Earth Day were the establishment of the Environmental Protection Agency, EPA, the creation of the President's Council on Environmental Quality, and the passage of the Clean Air Act, establishing national air quality standards. In 1995, Gaylord Nelson received the Presidential Medal of Freedom for his contributions to the environmental protection movement. Earth Day continues to be celebrated each spring.
What animals are members of the phylum Cnidaria?
Corals, jellyfishes, sea anemones, and hydras are members of the phylum Cnidaria. The name Cnidaria, from the Greek term nide, meaning nettle, and Latin term aria, meaning like or connected with, refers to the stinging structures that are characteristic of some of these animals. These organisms have a digestive cavity with only one opening to the outside. This opening is surrounded by a ring of tentacles used to capture food and defend against predators. Cells in the tentacles and outer body surface contain stinging, harpoon-like structures called nematocysts. Cnidarians are the first group in the animal hierarchy to have their cells organized into tissues.
What is an estuary?
Estuaries are places where freshwater streams and rivers meet the sea. The salinity of such areas is less than that of the open ocean but greater than that of a typical river. So organisms living in or near estuaries have special adaptations. Estuaries are rich sources of invertebrates, such as clams, shrimps, and crabs, as well as fishes such as striped bass, mullet, and menhaden. Unfortunately, estuaries are also popular locations for human habitation and businesses. Contamination from shipping, household pollutants, and power plants are carried to the sea by rivers and streams and threaten the ecological health of many estuaries.
What is pelvic inflammatory disease?
Pelvic inflammatory disease, PID, is a term used for a group of infections in the female organs. including inflammations of the fallopian tubes, cervix, uterus, and ovaries. It is the most common cause of female infertility today. PID is most often found in sexually active women under the age of 25 and almost always results from gonorrhea or chlamydia. But women who use intrauterine devices, IUDs, are also at risk.
What is the most enduring mathematical work of all time?
The Elements of Euclid, c. 300 BCE, has been the most enduring and influential mathematical work of all time. In it, the ancient Greek mathematician presented the work of earlier mathematicians and included many of his own innovations. The Elements is divided into 13 books, the first 6 cover plane geometry. 7 to 9 address arithmetic and number theory, 10 treats irrational numbers, and 11 to 13 discuss solid geometry. In presenting his theorems, Euclid used the synthetic approach, in which one proceeds from the known to the unknown by logical steps. This method became the standard procedure for scientific investigation for many centuries. And the Elements probably had a greater influence on scientific thinking than any other work.
What was the contribution to medical science of a dog named Marjorie?
Marjorie was a diabetic black and white mongrel that was the first creature to be kept alive by insulin, a substance that controls the level of sugar in the blood.
How many kinds of volcanoes are there?
Volcanoes are usually cone-shaped hills or mountains built around a vent, connecting to reservoirs of molten rock, or magma, below Earth's surface.
What is the most commonly used renewable energy source?
Hydroelectric power is the most common renewable energy source, based on consumption. Hydroelectric power accounts for 34% of the total amount of renewable energy resources. The capacity for hydroelectric power is about 95,000 megawatts. Hydropower facilities in the United States can generate enough power to supply 28 million households, or the equivalent of nearly 500 million barrels of oil. In 2008 it accounted for 6% of total electricity generation and 67% of generation from renewables.
How is blood pressure measured?
A sphygmomanometer is the device used to measure blood pressure. It was invented in 1881 by an Austrian named von Basch. It consists of a cuff with an inflatable bladder that is wrapped around the upper arm. A rubber bulb to inflate the bladder, and a device that indicates the pressure of blood. Measuring arterial tension, blood pressure, of a person's circulation is achieved when the cuff is applied to the arm over the artery and pumped to a pressure that occludes or blocks it. This gives the systolic measure, or the maximum pressure of the blood, which occurs during contraction of the ventricles of the heart. Air is then released from the cuff until the blood is first heard passing through the opening artery, called Korokov sounds. This gives diastolic pressure, or the minimum value of blood pressure that occurs during the relaxation of the arterial filling phase of the heart muscle.
Is glass a solid or a liquid?
Even at room temperature, glass appears to be a solid in the ordinary sense of the word. However, it actually is a fluid with an extremely high viscosity, which refers to the internal friction of fluids. Viscosity is a property of fluids by which the flow motion is gradually damped, slowed, and dissipated by heat. Viscosity is a familiar phenomenon in daily life. An opened bottle of wine can be poured, the wine flows easily under the influence of gravity. Maple syrup, on the other hand, cannot be poured so easily. Under the action of gravity, it flows sluggishly. The syrup has a higher viscosity than the wine. Glass is usually composed of mixed oxides based around the silicon dioxide, SiO2, unit. A very good electrical insulator, and generally inert to chemicals. Commercial glass is manufactured by the fusing of sand, silica, SiO2, limestone, CaCO2, and soda. Sodium carbonate, Na2CO3, at temperatures around 2552 degrees Fahrenheit to 2732 degrees Fahrenheit, 1400 degrees Celsius to 1500 degrees Celsius. On cooling, the melt becomes very viscous, and at about 932 degrees Fahrenheit, 500 degrees Celsius. Known as glass transition temperature, the melt solidifies to form soda glass. Small amounts of metal oxides are used to color glass, and its physical properties can be changed by the addition of substances like lead oxide, to increase softness, density, and refractive ability for cut glass and lead crystal, and borax, to significantly lower thermal expansion for cookware and laboratory equipment. Other materials can be used to form glasses if rapidly cooled from the liquid or gaseous phase to prevent an ordered crystalline structure from forming. Glass objects might have been made as early as 2500 BCE in Egypt and Mesopotamia, and glass blowing developed about 100 BCE in Phoenicia.
How is pregnancy confirmed?
Early external signs of pregnancy include a missed menstrual period, bleeding or spotting, fatigue, and tender, swollen breasts. A pregnancy test is needed to confirm pregnancy. Pregnancy tests look for the hormone human chorionic gonadotropin. HCG, also called the pregnancy hormone, in either urine or blood. This hormone is produced when the fertilized egg implants in the uterus. It is only present in pregnant women.
What is the mass of the Earth?
The mass of the Earth is estimated to be 6 sextillion, 588 quintillion short tons, 6.6 sextillion short tons, or 5.97 x 1024 kilograms, with the Earth's mean density being 5.515 times that of water, the standard. This is calculated from using the parameters of an ellipsoid adopted by the International Astronomical Union in 1964 and recognized by the International Union of Geodesy and Geophysics in 1967.
What is the medical term for a heart attack?
Myocardial infarction is the term used for a heart attack in which part of the heart muscle cells die as a result of reduced blood flow through one of the main arteries, many times due to arteriosclerosis. The outlook for the patient is dependent on the size and location of the blockage and extent of damage. But 33% of patients die within 20 days after the attack. It is a leading cause of death in the United States. Also, almost half of sudden deaths due to myocardial infarction occur before hospitalization. However, the possibility of recovery improves if vigorous treatment begins immediately.
How is body mass index, BMI, calculated?
The National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute, NLBI, in cooperation with the National Institute of Diabetes and Digestive and Kidney Diseases, released guidelines for weight for adults in 1998. These guidelines define degrees of overweight and obesity in terms of body mass index, BMI. Body mass index is based on weight and height and is strongly correlated with total body fat content. It is used to assess an individual's weight-related level of risk for heart disease, diabetes, and high blood pressure. Very muscular individuals, such as athletes, may have a high BMI without health risks.
Besides the Cullinan diamonds, what are the largest precious stones?
The largest ruby is a 8,500 carat stone that is 5.5 inches, 14 centimeters, tall, carved to resemble the Liberty Bell. The largest star ruby is the 6,465 carat eminent star from India that has a 6-line star. The largest cut emerald was found in Carniba, Brazil, in August 1974. It is 86,136 carats. A 2,302 carat sapphire from Annecy, Queensland, Australia, was carved into a 1,318 carat head of Abraham Lincoln, making it the largest carved sapphire. The Lone Star, at 9,719.5 carats, is the largest star sapphire. The largest natural pearl is the Pearl of Lao Tzu, also called the Pearl of Allah. Found in May 1934 in the shell of a giant clam at Palawan, Philippines. The pearl weighs 14 pounds, 1 ounce, 6.4 kilograms.
What are the advantages and disadvantages of the alternative fuels to gasoline to power automobiles?
The emissions of gasoline are a major source of air pollution in most U.S. urban areas. Researchers are investigating alternative fuels, which are cleaner, yet also economical. Alternative fuels include ethanol, methanol, biodiesel, compressed natural gas, electricity, and hydrogen. Currently, none of the alternatives delivers as much energy content as gasoline. So more of each of these fuels must be consumed to equal the distance that the energy of gasoline propels the automobile. Some predict that in the future families may have different vehicles that use different fuels for different types of driving. For example, electric or hybrids for short trips. An ethanol/electric hybrid for longer trips, and a biodiesel vehicle for hauling large loads. Alternative advantages. Disadvantages. Biodiesel from cleaner than petrodiesel, cost of pure biodiesel. Blends vegetable oils. Reduced emissions, B30, turn into solids in low temperatures. Electricity from no vehicle emissions, good short-lived bulky batteries. Batteries for stop-and-go driving. Limited trip range. Ethanol from corn, relatively clean fuel. Costs, corrosive damage. Biomass, etc. Hydrogen from plentiful supply, non-toxic. High cost, highly flammable. Electrolysis, etc.
Which plants are poisonous to cats?
Certain common house plants are poisonous to cats: caladium, elephant's ears, Dieffenbachia, dumb cane. Euphorbia pulcherrima, poinsettia, hedera, true ivy, mistletoe. Oleander. Philodendron prunus. Laurocerasus. Common or cherry laurel, rhododendron, azalea, Solanum capuscastrum, winter or false Jerusalem cherry.
What is a virus?
A virus is an infectious, protein-coded fragment of DNA or RNA. Viruses replicate by invading host cells and taking over the cell's machinery for DNA replication. Viral particles can then break out of the cells, spreading disease.
Why does the moon always keep the same face toward Earth?
Only one side of the moon is seen because it always rotates in exactly the same length of time that it takes to revolve about Earth. This combination of motions, called captured rotation, means that it always keeps the same side toward Earth.
Which plants have been used to create dyes?
Natural materials, including many plants, were the source of all dyes until the late 19th century. Blue dye was historically rare and was obtained from the indigo plant, Indigofera tincturatoria. Another color difficult to obtain for dye was red. The madder plant, Rubia tinctorum, was an excellent source of red dye and was used for the famous red coats of the British Army. Native Americans painted their faces and dyed their clothes red with the root of the bloodroot wildflower, which is also called redroot, Indian paint, and tetawort. Bloodroot, Sanguinaria canadensis, found in shady, damp, and woodsy soils. Blooms in May and has white flowers that are 2 inches, 5 centimeters, wide.
What is the current population and status of the great whales?
The 20th century, with its many technological improvements, was the most destructive period for the cetacea. In 1972, the U.S. Congress passed the Marine Mammal Protection Act. One of its goals was to reduce the number of small cetaceans, notably Stenella and Delphinus, killed and injured during commercial fishing operations, such as the incidental catch of dolphins in tuna purse seines. Nets that close up to form a huge ball to be hoisted aboard a ship. Dolphins are often found swimming with schools of yellowfin tuna and are caught along with the tuna by fishermen who use purse seine nets. The dolphins are drowned by this fishing method because they must be able to breathe air to survive. The Earth Island Institute established 5 standards in order for tuna to be considered dolphin safe. They are: no intentional chasing, netting, or encirclement of dolphins during an entire tuna fishing trip. No use of drift gill nets to catch tuna. No accidental killing or serious injury to any dolphins during net sets. No mixing of dolphin safe and dolphin deadly tuna in individual boat wells, for accidental kill of dolphins, or in processing or storage facilities. Each trip in the Eastern Tropical Pacific Ocean, ETP, by vessels 400 gross tons and above must have an independent observer on board attesting to the compliance with points 1 through 4, above. More than 90% of the world's tuna companies adhere to these standards.
What are the largest meteorites that have been found in the world?
The famous Willamette, Oregon, iron, displayed at the American Museum of Natural History in New York, is the largest specimen found in the United States. It is 10 feet, 3 meters, long and 5 feet, 1.5 meters, high.
What are the major organs of the digestive system?
The digestive system consists of the upper gastrointestinal tract, the lower gastrointestinal tract, and the accessory organs. The organs of the upper gastrointestinal tract are the oral cavity, esophagus, and stomach. The organs of the lower gastrointestinal tract are the small intestine and large intestine, also called the colon. The accessory organs are the salivary glands, the liver, gallbladder, and pancreas.
When a person swallows solid or liquid food, what prevents it from going down the windpipe?
Once food is chewed, voluntary muscles move it to the throat. In the pharynx, throat, automatic, involuntary reflexes take over. The epiglottis closes over the larynx, voice box, which leads to the windpipe. A sphincter at the top of the esophagus relaxes, allowing the food to enter the digestive tract.
What are some common top-level domain, TLD, suffixes?
Common top-level domain suffixes are, top-level domain, TLD, meaning of the suffix. Commercial organization, business, or company. Edu educational institution.org nonprofit organization. Sometimes used by other sites, .gov US government agency ILUS military agency ET network organizations.
How long does it take for the soft spots on a baby's skull to disappear?
The soft spots of a baby's skull are areas of incompletely ossified bones called fontanelles. The bones of the skull are connected by fibrous, pliable, connective tissue at birth. The flexibility of these connections allows the skull bones to move and overlap as the infant passes through the birth canal. The fontanelles begin to close about 2 months after birth. The largest of the fontanelles, the frontal fontanelle located on the top of the skull, does not close until 18 to 24 months of age.
How did the dodo become extinct?
The dodo became extinct around 1800. Thousands were slaughtered for meat, but pigs and monkeys, which destroyed dodo eggs, were probably most responsible for the dodo's extinction. Dodos were native to the Mascarene Islands in the central Indian Ocean. They became extinct on Mauritius soon after 1680 and on Réunion about 1750. They remained on Rodriguez until 1800.
If 30 people are chosen at random, what is the probability that at least 2 of them have their birthday on the same day?
The probability that at least 2 people in a group of 30 share the same birthday is about 70%.
How many different types of neurons are found in nerve tissue?
There are 3 main types of neurons: 1. Sensory neurons, 2. Motor neurons, and 3. Interneurons, also called association neurons. Sensory neurons conduct impulses from sensory organs, eyes, ears, and the surface of the skin, into the central nervous system. Motor neurons conduct impulses from the central nervous system to muscles or glands. Interneurons are neither sensory neurons nor motor neurons. They permit elaborate processing of information to generate complex behaviors. Interneurons comprise the majority of neurons in the central nervous system.
What is sterling silver?
Sterling silver is a high-grade alloy that contains a minimum of 925 parts in 1,000 of silver. 92.5% silver and 7.5% of another metal, usually copper.
Who are the fathers of spaceflight?
In 1903, Konstantin A. Tsiolkovsky, 1857–1935, a Russian high school teacher, completed the first scientific paper on the use of rockets for space travel. Several years later, Robert H. Goddard, 1882–1945, of the United States, and Hermann Oberth, 1894–1989, of Germany, awakened wider scientific interest in space travel. These 3 men worked individually on many of the technical problems of rocketry and space travel. They are known, therefore, as the fathers of spaceflight. In 1919, Goddard wrote the paper, A Method of Reaching Extreme Altitudes, which explained how rockets could be used to explore the upper atmosphere and described a way to send a rocket to the moon. During the 1920s, Tsiolkovsky wrote a series of new studies that included detailed descriptions of multi-stage rockets. In 1923, Oberth wrote The Rocket into Interplanetary Space, which discussed the technical problems of spaceflight and also described what a spaceship would be like.
What is menopause?
Menopause is the cessation of ovulation and menstrual periods. The supply of follicles in the ovaries is depleted, increasing the amount of follicle-stimulating hormone, FSH, while decreasing the amount of estrogen and progesterone. The process may take 1 to 2 years. The years preceding the final menstrual period are known as perimenopause. Menopause usually occurs between ages 45 and 55, the average age in the United States is 51 to 52 years.
Why does the color of clothing appear different in sunlight than it does in a store under fluorescent light?
White light is a blend of all the colors, and each color has a different wavelength. Although sunlight and fluorescent light both appear as white light, they each contain slightly different mixtures of these varying wavelengths. When sunlight and fluorescent light, white light, are absorbed by a piece of clothing, only some of the wavelengths, composing white light, reflect off the clothing. When the retina of the eye perceives the color of the clothing, it is really perceiving these reflected wavelengths. The mixture of wavelengths determines the color perceived. This is why an article of clothing sometimes appears to be a different color in the store than it does on the street.
Why do some dentists treat the molars and premolars of children with sealants?
Sealants, a soft plastic coating applied to the tooth surface, can protect a child's first and second permanent molars from decay by filling in the pits and fissures where food and bacteria might otherwise accumulate. The plastic is hardened with a special light or chemical.
Do all animals have red blood?
The color of blood is related to the compounds that transport oxygen. Hemoglobin, containing iron, is red and is found in all vertebrates. Animals having a backbone, and a few invertebrates, animals lacking a backbone. Annelids, segmented worms, have either a green pigment, chlorocruorin, or a red pigment, hemerythrin. Some crustaceans, arthropods having divided bodies and generally having gills, have a blue pigment, hemocyanin, in their blood.
What are some examples of genetic engineering in animals and microbes?
One of the earliest applications of biotechnology was the genetic engineering of a growth hormone. Bovine GH, produced naturally in the bovine pituitary. Bovine GH can increase milk production in lactating cows. Using biotechnology, scientists bioengineered the gene that controls bovine GH production into E. coli, grew the bacteria in fermentation chambers, and thus produced large quantities of bovine GH. The bioengineered bovine GH, when injected into lactating cows, resulted in an increase of up to 20% in national milk production. Using bovine GH, farmers are able to stabilize milk production in their herds, avoiding fluctuations in production levels. The U.S. Food and Drug Administration, FDA, approved use of recombinant bovine growth hormone in 1993 after 10 years of study. A similar regimen was adapted using the pig equivalent of growth hormone, porcine GH. Injected in pigs, porcine GH reduced back fat and increased muscle, meat, gain. Pig growth hormone has been test marketed in a select population with no ill effects. However, it has not yet been approved by the FDA. The first transgenic animal available as a food source on a large scale was the salmon, which reached U.S. food markets in 2001, following rigid evaluations of consumer and environmental safety. These salmon have the capability of growing from egg to market size, 6 to 10 pounds, in 18 months. As compared to conventional fish breeding, which takes up to 36 months to bring a fish to market size. The use of transgenic salmon can help reduce overfishing of wild salmon stocks.